Okay, we're ready to go?
Yeah, that's us recording, Provost.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Okay, well, firstly, can I welcome everybody to the meeting here this evening. Again, we're obviously having to do this remotely, and we have to do it for the foreseeable future, I guess. So the usual rules will apply. Any motions or amendments will need to be moved and seconded in the usual fashion, and all votes will obviously now need to be by a roll call. If nobody moves against any of the papers, then of course they'll just be deemed to be passed. So if you're not comfortable with anything, you need to formally move against it. As always, I'll be as liberal as I can be with the length of time that people might want to speak, but I would ask councillors obviously not to abuse that privilege. Can I remind everybody that the meeting will be recorded and will be published in the council's YouTube channel. And Mr. Bruce Sandilands, the local democracy reporter, is sitting in the meeting, and he will report on events, I think, to the Barhead News. So before we actually go into the agenda itself, could I just say something briefly about the Citizens of the Year Award? As you know, normally at the December meeting, we do have the presentation for the Citizen of the Year. So we did meet, we have selected the winner after, I have to say, quite a number of nominations and very good and able people coming forward, very strong nominations. But the judging panel have decided to award this year's Citizen of the Year to Alison McGowan. Some of you may know Alison. Alison has been the driving force of the community group Thornley Bank Together, and has worked tirelessly during the pandemic to tackle food poverty, and does a wide range of other fantastic work in the Thornley Bank community. As I say, in normal circumstances, we would have Alison at the council meeting to give her the formal presentation, but as you'll understand, we can't do that this evening. So I will meet with Alison on Friday, Friday afternoon. I think it's scheduled to socially distance, give her an award and maybe do a wee bit of PR around that. But we will get Alison back into the council as soon as we're all able to get back into the council chamber. You know, I've no idea when that is, but I guess it's going to be late spring, early summer before we can do that. But we will get Alison in due course. Okay, so I just wanted to make you aware of that before we started the meeting. So can I move now to item number 1, which is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Provost. Yes, we've got apologies from Deputy Provost Cunningham this evening. Okay,
thank you very much. Item number 2 is declaration of interests. You will recall that the Council's Code of Conduct requires elected members to declare any financial or non-financial interest you may have in any of the items on the agenda. So can I kick off by declaring my own item of interest as a member of the East Renfrewshire Leisure and Trust Board? Any other nominations?
Yes, Provost, I had my hand up, and I have a non-financial interest in the Leisure Trust for items 10 and 11.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Grant. Other ones, Councillor Miller.
Yes, Provost, can I say I've got a non-financial interest in the exempt item at the end, because not only is Mr. Lambie a good friend, but he's also a neighbour, and I'm quite sure it's non-financial because the bugger will not give me a pound off my bill.
Okay, we'll note that. Thank you for that. Councillor O'Kane.
Thank you, Provost. Just a non-financial interest in respect of 10 and 11, in similar terms to yourself and Councillor Grant as a member of the Leisure Trust.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Merrick.
Likewise, same as yourself in terms of being on the Leisure Trust Board and on financial interests in items 10 and 11.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Provost.
Councillor McLean.
Yes, I've got an interest. Mr. Lamb is also a friend of mine.
Okay, right, we'll record that. I think that's everybody who's got their hand up. Can I ask people to put their hand down if they've recorded their interest? Okay, we will now move on to the minute volume. The first one is item number 3 is the minute of the meeting of the 28th of October. Now, the minute is here for approval. Are there any matters of accuracy in the minute that anybody has an issue with? No, can I accept that?
Sorry, Provost, I had my hand
Sorry, I
raised.
beg your pardon, didn't see that there yet. Councillor MacDonald?
Yes, it was just with regards to an issue of the accuracy of the minutes concerning the COVID-19 recovery action update on the October minute. The former Director of Education briefly spoke about access to outdoor pitches, and in the last sentence it states she added that access to outdoor pitches could not be given without access to toilet facilities within buildings. I would like the words toilet facilities to be omitted at that point. I'm somewhat at odds as to why quite a large part of dialogue between myself and the former director wasn't recorded, but I then raised my hand to ask a question which was specifically what it was within the buildings that was required, at which point the former Director of Education stated toilet facilities at that point. I then highlighted that Busby Amateurs FC had made it clear that they had stated they did not require indoor facilities and were happy to work with the council to use portable outdoor facilities at William Wood High School if they could be provided. And I drew comparisons to the current build of Busby Nursery and the fact that construction workers had been provided toilet facilities in the form of outdoor toilets. And I was at odds as to why they could be provided here and not for children and young people trying to continue in the safe outdoor activities of playing football. So I would like it noted that the former director gave no response at all to the points that I raised, nor did she answer why the toilets could be provided for one and not for the other. I would like to say as well that this is a significant section of verbal dialogue between myself and the former director, raising important points in relation to the council response to external clubs accessing facilities, and I'm at odds as to why none of it was recorded in the minutes. And just lastly, for the benefit of the person responsible for recording what is said, all of this took place between 1 hour and 37 and 1 hour and 40 on the YouTube broadcast. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor MacDonald. As I'm sure as we've said on a number of occasions, the minute volume is not meant to capture a verbatim debate or discussion, and it would be very lengthy if we were to go down that road. I'm really just trying to feel for, in terms of matters of accuracy, what is really missing from the minute. Now,
I fully appreciate what you're saying, Provost. Now, I don't expect things to be recorded verbatim, but none of what I raised, absolutely zero of what I raised with the director was recorded in the minutes. None of it.
well, I'll ask, before we move on to anybody else's any issues, I will ask Mr. Daly, who is in charge of the minutes, if he wants to comment on that. Is there anything that, in terms of your recollection and having listened to the broadcast, that is missing from the minute volume that we can correct?
Thanks, Provost. I mean, it's highly likely that things that members say at meetings are not recorded. As you've already said, they aren't verbatim records. Councillor MacDonald himself has already referred to the YouTube recording at a particular page at a particular time. So it's the record of the discussion that took place, the questions he asked and the answers that he got and didn't got, as he claims, are already available for everybody to see on the council's YouTube video. But I'm certainly happy to record his additional comments today about the fact that some of the comments that he made at the previous meeting were not recorded in the minute.
Okay, thank you for that. Is that sufficient for you, Councillor MacDonald, if we record that for tonight's meeting?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Wallace, your hand up.
Can't hear you.
You're on mute, Councillor Wallace.
Yes, I wish. Here we go. Right. Yeah, it's just to say that I know it says in the minute I raised the issue of a lack of response to a question I'd raised back in June relating to Huntley Park. I just want to say that I can confirm that a response has been received, and my thanks to the Chief Planning Officer for following through on that. Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any other comments of accuracy in that minute? Okay, can we accept it as a true record? And move on to item number 4, which is the minute of the meeting of the 26th of November 2020. Again, that minute is there for matter of accuracy. You comfortable with that one? Yeah.
Right.
Okay, and item 5 is the minutes volume 29th October to 16th December. So again, the minutes are there for accuracy, but also for approval. So are there any questions on the minute volume? Councillor Miller?
Thanks, Provost. I actually had my hand up there for the last one. And it's for the cabinet papers on the 26th of November. It's page 1325. It's about the garden waste charging proposal. As the chair of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee who first brought this to the Cabinet's attention, I'm delighted that the Cabinet has agreed to point B, which is to defer the implementation of the scheme to take into consideration of the Council's overall financial position, simply because we cannot keep asking our residents for even more money with continued increase in council tax by the maximum each year. Can I remind Council that we've increased council tax by almost 11% over the past 3 years, and I've never met a single resident who's had a similar increase in salaries to help pay for it. Can I ask this to be taken into consideration when proposing a council tax rise, whether it's tomorrow or next February? That's my point on these cabinet papers. Can I carry on to the next group of papers?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first one's just a matter of accuracy, but yeah, the minute volume you can ask a question on.
Right, the minute volume is the going in the pack minutes on the 2nd of December, page 1347, and it's to commend the planning department for inviting the acting head of the reporter's office, Scott Ferry, who gave the packet a presentation and answered questions into their work and the way things were done within their office. Whilst we sometimes didn't agree with all he said with individual reporters' decisions, he gave us an insight into the way they come to their decisions. Perhaps the department can pass on our thanks. I've also got questions for the minutes, but it's going to come up later on in the agenda about the learning and childcare expansions. Do you want me to ask the question then or ask it now?
If it's on the agenda, I think we're probably better just keeping it to that item on the agenda. Okay, rather than do it twice.
I was also going to commend the work of Councillor Bamforth and their attempts to relocate the Peter Pan statue, as she's obviously a regular visitor to Never Neverland, but that would really be a wee bit facetious to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The comment is totally lost in me and probably to others, but anyway, we'll take it the spirit it was meant. Christmas pantomime, I think. Councillor MacDonald.
No, that's an old one.
No, your hands up. No, you're on mute.
Councillor Wallace wanted something.
Well, I've got a few. Councillor Convery then.
Down.
Okay, Councillor Convery then. We'll do Councillor Wallace. Just do it in order.
Thank you very much for that, Provost. It's just quickly, it's on the minutes for the appeals. It's on page 1364. It's the last paragraph, and it's just, it says on it that the appellant, including the provision of appropriate training, it was appropriate training and support.
Okay, can we add that into the minute volume, Buster Daly?
Yeah, happy to amend the minute as Councillor Convery suggested, Provost.
Okay,
Thank you.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, just a couple of things in the minute volume. If we go back to the Audit and Scrutiny Committee meeting, I know it was sort of following on from the annual accounts. It was really, I was very frustrated, I have to say, that I did ask a question of the chief, well, I asked a question, and it was the chief accountant that responded. And the question was, and it surrounded internal audit and questioning the cut in hours. And I was actually, the response I received was really to say that the controls that have been in place were being used in relation to the disbursement of grant funding that was being made available. Now, I'm very concerned about scrutiny in the organisation. This is not a critique of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee, but I do have concerns about the internal audit and the number of hours that are being cut. From what I can understand, out of about over 40 odd projects that are on the go, only 2 have been completed, and a hefty number, probably about a quarter, have been delayed to the following year. And I know that the internal auditor had really put warning signs up at the previous meeting to say that there was serious problems with the number of hours that she had left. Now, it's interesting, I feel that the representative from Audit Scotland, John Corbett, in which he was saying that he said it would be worthwhile for the committee to remain alert to the assurances from the officers and how they satisfy your terms of reference. And really, I do feel that if we scratch the surface of that comment, what he was really saying, and he said it earlier on, he did say that the responses that had been made in terms of COVID concerns and the guidelines from Audit Scotland, he said that yes, the responses from CMT had been comprehensive, but he certainly did not say they were satisfactory. And if you actually look at one of the questions that Audit Scotland insist that the Audit and Scrutiny Committee ask is about internal audit and the amount of support that internal audit is getting from management. And if you actually look at the response is there is no support. They have taken away that team on other duties and on duties that they are supposed to be auditing. So I just, again, for the second time in a row at the second full council meeting, is just to put a marker in the sand, please, that there are concerns over internal audit and scrutiny. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the remarks. I know, Councillor Miller, you chair the audit. Do you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, the only thing I would respond to in that one is that a lot, well, as Councillor Wallace will be well aware, the internal audit department is very small, very few people in it, and one of the kind of main men in it has been seriously ill. So he obviously is not at work, and some of the rest of the people have been moved over to do something else. And I actually share your concern, because some of these the people that are supposed to be doing the internal audit are actually doing jobs that they're supposed to be auditing on. But these are, because they can't get into the office, they're actually doing a lot of the voluntary work. I see Mrs. McCross with her hand up, so maybe she'll add further.
Yeah. And Mrs. McCross, do you want to add to that?
Thanks, Provost. I'd like to give some sort of reassurance to Councillor Wallace. When the staff from internal audit were used to help out with the payment of the economic development grants to small businesses, that was not by taking them off their normal duties. They were moved because they were unable to carry out their normal duties because of the impact of COVID across the council. And it was because they were unable to carry out normal work that they were then available to help out elsewhere in the COVID response. It wasn't a decision to move people away from scheduled audit work, and the Chief Internal Auditor has made it very clear that because of departmental focus on COVID issues, she's unable to access and deliver her normal programme of audit work. So it's only because she's been prevented from carrying out her normal duties that the staff were reallocated.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Yeah. Thank you, Provost. Just to bring that one to a close, I have another point on the minutes I'd like to bring up, but just to bring that one to a close, it seems very odd that Audit Scotland can carry out a full audit, unqualified at the end of it, and yet we can't, as our small internal audit team, cannot carry out an audit. I must suspect that if Audit Scotland are carrying out their audit, that they must have access to people, they must have access to information, which can't be a whole lot different to what internal audit are looking for. And again, this comes back to what Audit Scotland were saying, is that how much support is internal audit getting from management? And I suspect Audit Scotland got all the help they could possibly get in order that we get an unqualified audit. But for some peculiar reason, internal audit are not getting that same support. I'll leave it at that. I'm just putting that flag up. The second issue I would like to bring up, if I possibly could, but what's particularly difficult at the moment, and I know I've mentioned about audit and scrutiny, etc., and we don't want to start to have to bring things to, or call things in order that they go in front of audit and scrutiny. It gets discussed and then moves on. I think the difficulty we have just now, and I don't know if other councillors feel the same, and I think Councillor Lafferty has said this in the past, is that the way things are just now, you're not walking down a corridor and bumping into someone and having a wee chat, and all of a sudden you've got another wee bit of information and you're getting a full picture of what's going on. We're all very much working remotely and very reliant on what is going on here. Now, if I can give an example, that a recent cabinet meeting, and it's in the minute here. It was the one that took place on the 3rd of December. Now, a lot of what has been raised there, it just raises some questions, which is, for example, it's actually stating down here when we look at the minute about additional capital expenditure of £910,000, etc. Another £803,000 for coronavirus issues being made to Heron Brothers. Now, from what I can understand, at the moment, as a council, we are about 4.5 million behind because of COVID expenditure, 4.5 million down from what we are actually getting support from government. And now, when you get a minute in front of this, which is suggesting that we are helping bail out one of our suppliers, one of the contractors, to the tune of about £800,000, it really must stick in the throat of many residents who think, hold on a second here, we have got some really tough times ahead next year. I hate to think what budget cuts we're going to have to be looking at next year. And for us to be seen to be bailing out one of our suppliers, what I'm trying to say is that this comes up before Cabinet, and no other councillors are not having an opportunity to understand what is behind this. Yes, we can fire off an email comes back, but as you know, it takes about 50 emails to be the equivalent of a 5-minute conversation, and these are conversations which we are unable to do. So is it at all possible on this particular issue, and I appreciate that it's not part of the format, but I would like to think that maybe it's something we can include in these remote discussions or remote meetings that we have, that we could perhaps have a bit more open discussion on something like this one, for example. Is there somebody who could maybe explain why it appears that we are bailing out another business? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Wallace. Now, my understanding that particular point that you're making about the Cabinet paper is actually on the agenda, because I think the recommendation was to actually submit that to full council anyway. So that's in front of us tonight, is it not? So, I don't want to preempt the discussion, but it might be as well to wait till that paper comes up later this evening, and you can have that discussion about the specifics about the payment to Heron Brothers and whatever. On the general thing, I would just remind councillors, obviously there is a call-in mechanism, and there is the mechanism, as always, if you have sight of the papers beforehand. If people have, any councillor who's any issues with the paper, before it goes to Cabinet, can raise it with the appropriate convener, and I would always encourage councillors to do that. But I mean, as I say, that particular issue, which I accept is important, is in front of us later. So perhaps just we'll leave the discussion till we reach that point of the agenda. Are you okay with that, Councillor Wallace?
Yes, I am. I just want to emphasise the difficulties and the timelines involved when you are working remotely, about quite how different the whole system is. And I appreciate what you're saying. We get our council opposition will get these papers coming through just a few days before it's going through, and we perhaps don't have the same flexibility or the same time that we perhaps have had in the past. And I'm just trying to suggest that as we are working remotely like this, as to whether meetings such as this can be allowed a degree of flexibility. And I do appreciate, Provost, I do recognise that you have given some, you have kind of opened up discussion better in the past. But yes, I'm quite happy with what you're saying. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Wallace. Are there any other items, any hands up for the minute volume? No, okay. So can I move on then to item number 6, which is items which are remitted to the council. The first one is the General Fund Capital Programme. It's a fairly routine report seeking approval of the amendments to the programme, but I'm happy to take any questions that anybody may have on it. Okay with that. And the second one is the Housing Capital Programme. Same thing again, looking for approval, but happy to take any questions and the amendments to the programme.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Danny agreeing it in the background is always a good sign. Item number 3 is Interim Treasury Management Report from the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. Again, it's remitted for approval of the bodies listed in the investment of the surplus funds, for approval, but happy to take any questions that anybody may have on it. Councillor Wallace.
You're on mute.
Yep, sorry, you're on mute, Councillor Wallace.
Just look at the chart on page 46 in terms of long-term debt maturity profile. We're looking way into 2069, 2070. I wonder, could somebody just explain what these loans are that they're taking so long to mature for us? Thank you.
Mrs. McCrossan, can you answer that one? Thank you.
Yes, these loans are taken for support of the capital programme. We've got a lot of investment in very long-term assets at the moment. We have invested and continued to invest heavily in schools. And when we're talking about buildings, they've got lives of maybe 40 to 60 years. At the same time, the rates that are available at the moment for borrowing are exceptionally low. And at the low end of the curve, we're getting very, very good value, in some cases down even below 2%. It has been for 45, 46, 48-year money. So we've been taking advantage of that while still living within our Treasury policies, which is that we don't have more than 15% of our value of the loan book repayable in any 1 year.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wallace.
Yeah, I think it's just a reminder to everybody and our residents that when we get the new schools built, these wonderful new buildings that we have, it's just the realization that your children and your grandchildren will be paying for the benefit of this, and what is happening just now isn't necessarily to do with the wonderful things we're doing, but the wonderful things we are expecting of our children and grandchildren in order to pay for this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, can we approve that paper and move on to number 4, which is the early learning and childcare expansion, which I think we've already been discussing in part through the minute volume, but this is the opportunity to perhaps deal with the guts of the issue in front of us at full council this evening. I think there is a typo in terms of the amount of money which is going to Scottish Water. But perhaps to kick it off, I could maybe pass over to Mr. Cahill just to deal with that particular typo, but just give a wee bit of background to the paper. Thank you.
Yep, happy to, Provost. Partly this is to do with the speed and the pressure and trying to deal with all these things with COVID going on in the background. However, paragraph 23 has a typo or an error in it. It should refer to the additional Scottish Waterworks of being £576,000 and not 526. And that mistake is obviously repeated through the paper when you look at the other things. But basically, in effect, what I'm really just asking is that the council, in considering the two recommendations at C and D, change the recommendation on C to C, that additional capital expenditure of £960,000 be approved to cover the additional committed works. So apologies for the error.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cahill. Obviously, we're looking to approve this paper tonight, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments that people have. I know, Councillor Wallace, you've already made a few comments, but is there anybody who wants to comment further on it? Councillor Wallace.
Yeah, I've made a number of comments about how it appears as if we're bailing out one of our suppliers, and yet it would have been helpful if perhaps the Director of Environment could perhaps just explain a bit more fully as to why it is we're doing this. It may well be it's in black and white here, the reason why we're doing it, but if we could perhaps have it just in plain language. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wallace. Mr. Cahill, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thanks. The reason that these additional costs have been incurred is explained in the paper, and that it was through the Scottish Government guidance that the contractors had to basically close up on site and more or less demobilise. And when they were asked then to start back up again in the intervening period, when they were closed down, they still had several additional costs for which they weren't getting paid through the contract. So there would be things like, for example, they had increased welfare facilities on site. They've had to cope with social distancing. There's remobilisation. There's the hire of plant, general labour, skips, site setup, site security, health and safety, temporary power, cleaning, insurances, all these types of things, which are things that the contractor still had to meet the cost of while the site was closed. There were two options, I suppose. One, that the contractor could leave the site, and I would go back and refer you to my paper about the urgency of getting these nurseries completed because they're causing disruption to children and to their parents, and that's always been the case. Had we demobilised and asked them to leave the site, then that could have incurred liabilities for us, for example. Also, there was a potential that the contractor could walk away and terminate the contract, and there was also further potential that remobilisation, if things had been completely closed down, would have added considerable timescales onto the whole thing. In the event, I have to point out that the agreement with them, we've got legal advice that it avoids the uncertainty and costs of potential litigation, and they would, if we don't make that payment, they would have a right to take us to adjudication. The advice we have received is, one, we would almost certainly lose an adjudication, and it would incur court costs, legal costs, over and above whatever the adjudicator agreed that we had to pay them. Also, the report's not clear on this, but I would just want to point out that what we've agreed provisionally is to share the total additional costs with the contractors involved. So that's where the sum of £803,000 comes from. The additional cost is actually 1.6 million or thereabouts. And I think in terms of being able to support the local economy, I have to say that working with those contractors, and particularly Heron Brothers, they have bent over backwards to accommodate the council, and all they have ever really wanted to do and to achieve is to help us to get the nurseries finished. They've been very receptive. So I think from the advice we've got is that if we did go ahead and terminate the contract, it could involve us in a lengthy court battle, it could involve us in additional costs, and it could potentially involve the contractor ceasing work on site, or what I can't predict what some of those things are.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carroll. Not much to that. Councillor Wallace.
No, I appreciate the Director of Environment just putting that into plain words. It's almost as if we have a gun to our heads, but I would just like to say to the Leader of the Council, to our Chief Accountant, etc., and to the Chief Executive, that when we're calculating how much COVID has cost us and how much we are actually receiving from central government, from Scottish Government to help pay for us, to help local authorities cover the costs, can we just make sure that costs such as the one as the Director of Environment has raised becomes part of that? Is it 4.5 million plus this million or thereby that we're having to include? Because the effect that these things are going to have on us as an organisation is going to be crippling. And this is the reason I raise this subject is, and on this particular one is why are we bailing people out when we're in such difficulties ourselves? Other organisations, I'm sure, are not getting bailed out to the same extent as perhaps we are here. I do appreciate the argument the Director of Environment is making. I have to accept what he is saying. But just again, to the Chief Executive, if you can start making some big noises, please, and the Leader of the Council make some big noises through at Scottish Government, at COSLA, etc., that this is just unbearable. It's another additional cost to what COVID is coming here, and we are not getting the support from Scottish Government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wallace, for that. I'm sure your comments will be noted. There's a number of people waiting to speak, so I'll just try and go through them in order. But Councillor Miller, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Thank you very much, Provost. The only thing I appreciate everything the Director has said, but as I understand it, that when the council are making up these contracts, they build in various different conditions for, say, such as acts of God and things like that. Yet the council have to now spend 1.7 million just to keep the contractors happy. Do these contracts, after all, were signed by both parties in good faith? So I understand you're splitting the cost with them, but what relates to Scottish Water as well?
Okay, well, that's maybe the officers to respond at the end, but a number of councillors with their hand up. Could I ask Councillor MacDonald next?
Thank you, Provost. I agree with Councillor Miller and Councillor Wallace, especially the comment about the gun to the council's head. I do agree with that. I just feel that there should be a much more robust and watertight financial protections and leverages installed in terms of agreeing terms prior to these builds going ahead, because it does seem very much so that they have the control. Once the build is in to a significant portion of it taking place, they seem to have far more leverage in terms of dictating or backing out of terms and everything else. So I do feel that we have to have a better system involved. And also, I just wanted to ask the Director about the comparison between Crookford Family Centre and Busby Nursery, the new Busby Nursery. What were the months roughly for each of those two facilities, the groundbreaking on each one of them?
Right, sorry, what are you asking there? What's the?
I was just asking what month and year was the ground broken at Busby Nursery, right, in comparison to Crookford Family Centre, the family centre that's just opened yesterday. Thank you.
Right, okay, well, see if we get an answer to that. Can I just deal with the other councillors with their hand up first, and we'll come back to the officers. Councillor Aiken.
Yeah, the figure of the 1.6 million that our suppliers come up with, is that just the one supplier? Was that did you mention Heron Brothers, or was that several suppliers? I just want to say that £1.6 million, it's almost like open checkbook time. It's a completely outrageous figure. You know, did somebody look at that? Was it broken down properly? It just sounds as if somebody's just thrown everything they can think of together. £1.6 million, and we just pay up, or even paying half of it is just outrageous. And it's public money, taxpayers' money, just been handed across to a contractor. It's disproportionate amount of money, and it's just ridiculous.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. First of all, I think it makes quite clear in the paper why the costs have been incurred. No one anticipated us to have a COVID pandemic, and the knock-on effect of that has been extremely costly, as we have seen not just in Scotland, but across the UK and indeed across the world. This situation is similar to many that is happening across a whole host of authorities and will no doubt continue to happen into the future. In terms of raising the cost of the pandemic, yes, Councillor Wallace, that does get raised on a regular basis with Scottish Government, and indeed Scottish Government raise it with Westminster on an even more regular basis, perhaps. And I think what is extremely notable is when you look at the costs already incurred and what has been spent and will continue to be spent on businesses across the board or across the UK because of this pandemic. But if you look at the Chancellor, already Westminster has withheld its budget. It hasn't held its budget at the appropriate time. So clearly they know that there are significant issues in relation to that. But what was interesting in the spending review was that they suggested that going forward that Scotland should receive, I think it was another 1.4 billion. Now, having already given significantly more than that over the last few months since March, really, since lockdown, it was shown that that was going to be a paltry sum in respect of the ongoing costs that we were likely to face. So these issues do get raised on a regular basis. It has been flagged up, and I'm quite certain that as soon as anything is forthcoming, then we will get recompense for many of those issues. But in terms of it happening, this was a programme of works for 6 nurseries. This was a programme of works which we wouldn't have incurred any additional cost had you not to shut down, move off site, without only leaving limited security, etc., in place. So these costs have been incurred, and they will continue to be incurred, I've no doubt, across the country. It's one of the impacts of the pandemic, and yes, we will argue the case to get additional funding on the back of it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Buchanan. Councillor McLean, put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Provost. It's just going back to the costs there. I can understand that there's prelims, site cabins and hires and things such as that, but on page 57, section 17, it says the costs and restarts are caused due mainly to prolongation due to being able to have some 50% of the workforce on site. Now, if we've had a programme of works and everything scheduled in, if the contractor can only supply 50% of the workforce, surely that's down to them. Why are we paying for that? If it's only 50% of the workforce that have been on it, that's surely not our responsibility. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. McMillan, I see you got your hand up. You want to speak?
Thank you very much, Provost. It was just maybe to refer councillors to some paragraphs in the paper that might be useful before the director comes in, particularly with regard to Scottish Water. My understanding is the payments, or at least the bulk of the payments, are not to Scottish Water, it's to meet Scottish Water requirements. And I think there was some discussion in how the figures came about. If you look at paragraphs, I'm looking at paragraphs 21, 22, and 23 on pages 57 and 58, it actually breaks the sums of money down in each nursery. For example, Overley and Glenwood, it was possible to collect the buildings to water courses, and the cost of these works was 380,000. So there's work there that's broken down, and I'm sure Mr. Cathal's team have got further breakdown of that. The other aspect is paragraph 15, which regards COVID. So just for clarity in paragraph 15, because there was a couple of questions about this. First of all, the work was done by Gardner and Theobald, who I'm not quite sure what the proper name for them is, but the overall managers there are sort of, Mr. Cahill can help, but my understanding is they take an independent overview. So they, as would be expected in a council project of this size, took an independent look at these costs, which is quite a specialist field. So they advised Mr. Cahill's team. So just to give you comfort, there was an independent view in this. It wasn't a matter of the consultant asked for the money and it was handed over. There was an independent review by well-qualified, very experienced team of well-renowned industry specialists. And also, just for clarity as well, the last sentence in that refers to the total sum being £803, but it talks about a number of work packages, so it wasn't just Heron Brothers. The 803, my understanding, was mainly to Heron Brothers, but it was also to a couple of other contractors as well. So just so that everyone's noticed paragraph 15. So there's a lot of detail that I'm sure Mr. Cahill and Gardner and Theobald have behind these costs. So hopefully that helps just bring a little bit clarity to it.
Okay, thank you for that, Mrs. McMillan. We'll call in Mr. Cahill at the end, obviously, just to cover some of the questions that have been asked. Councillor MacDonald, you get your hand up again.
I would just like to say that perhaps these contracts need to be reviewed for the future. I mean, we've gone through COVID. It's put in front of us a variety of different problems that we never knew existed prior to it coming along, and I think it would be probably very good for us to learn lessons from how these contracts are drafted for the future, so that we have more protection. I mean, ultimately, we have to answer as a council and as councillors to the electorate, who have who are obviously footing the bill, a large amount of the bill for this. So I do feel that there needs to be better protections and better leverage so that we have more control. It seems that the contractors have more control, and I do agree with what Councillor McLean said with regards to, you know, why should we foot the bill? You know, at the end of the day, they sign a contract, COVID happens, you know, that's just the nature of the beast, and ultimately they sign a contract, and it should be them that's bearing the cost of it, in my view. Anyway, that's my piece on this.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Cahill, do you want to respond to any of that?
Sure, there's an awful lot of points in there, and the report does explain many things. In relation to the Scottish Water issues, those arose, so we just had to negotiate with Scottish Water to get a solution. Otherwise, without a connection to the sewage, the nurseries couldn't open. So in those circumstances, my priority was to deliver the nurseries. Councillor MacDonald made some comments about groundbreaking. Don't know the answer to those. I'd need to get advice from my PATS people about that. Paragraph 15 in the report does make it clear, as the Chief Executive pointed out, that our consultants, G&T, negotiated the claim with Heron Brothers. Those are our consultants. They act for us. They have got detailed evidence, detailed analysis and detailed audit of the claim to ensure that they could come back to us to say they were satisfied that the claim was reasonable. There was a point made about 50% of the workforce. Well, fair enough, understand that, but that was through Scottish Government guidance in relation to social distancing, etc. So the contractor, whilst they might have wanted to be able to provide additional staff or to speed it up, weren't in a position to do so. Comments from Councillor MacDonald, review contracts for the future. Absolutely, lessons learned. Nobody saw COVID coming like this, and I don't think that's going to be the end of it with regard to major contracts. So I think I've covered as many of the points possibly as I could there. If there's anything that's outstanding, please feel free to raise it with me.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Cahill. Mrs. McMillan, you get your hand up. Are you looking to speak again, or are you just not taking your hand down? No, that's fine. Councillor McLean.
Yes, thank you, Provost. It's just to ask Mr. Cahill that I realise that due to social distancing and things like that, but did the contractor not receive government grants to mitigate this if they couldn't get enough people on site?
Mr. Cahill.
The answer to that is possibly partly, in that they may have had staff on furlough. However, we've stripped out any costs where they've got Scottish Government grant for it. Gardner and Theobald have done that for us to make sure that there's no double counting. This is only to cover them for definite additional costs for which they've got no other support from the Scottish Government.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands raised at the moment. We obviously had a good discussion on this. Councillor MacDonald, your hand's just gone up. Do you want to add something?
Just add very quickly, the reason why I brought up the Busby versus Crook for nursery comparison, and I appreciate he doesn't have the data there for me, that he can share that at a later date, but what I would say is my recollection that Crookford started much later than Busby, and here we are at Busby still, and I appreciate the fact that COVID has slowed things down, but the general pace of how Busby Nursery is coming to fruition is as slow as a week in jail.
Okay, we note that comment. Obviously, the paper is in front of us tonight for approval. Can I accept the paper, or is anybody going to move against it? Okay, can I take silence as we approve the paper? With that, I think, very useful discussion. Can I then move on then to item number 7, which is the statements by conveners and representatives of joint boards and committees. I think we've got a statement from Councillor Bamforth.
Thank you, Provost. Before I give my statement, I'd just like to confirm what Councillor Miller said. Yes, I am indeed trying to save the Peter Pan statue for the people of Mearskirk, but particularly the children of Hazeldean Nursery. His reference to Neverland, though, I don't think is comparable to the pantomime that's going on in Westminster at the moment, especially the Panto Dame. That appears to be Boris Johnson, but hey, perhaps that's more of a horror story than a pantomime. But anyway, so as far as the IGB is concerned, our latest meeting of the IGB and of the Performance and Audit Committee was on the 25th of November. We had a presentation on Care at Home and heard about a number of areas of progress within the service, including an update on recent recruitment success and how well our embedded hospital discharge team and pharmacy support is working. The results from the September user survey saw an 84% positive response from the 206 returns received. The demand for the service is almost back to pre-COVID levels, and the service has seen an increasing number of people with complex needs. We were given a detailed overview of a number of operational and governance measures. We don't yet have an inspection date, but the IGB were encouraged by the progress against the recommendations, and the IGB recognised the hard work of all staff in the service over a very challenging time. The IGB approved its participation engagement strategy and recognised the hard work and collaboration that's gone into this. The importance of listening and engaging with others was acknowledged as a real benefit. He agreed that we would have a one-year bridging strategy plan for 21 to 22, and that we'll publish our usual 3-year plan for 22 to 23. Our winter plan is very different this year, with much more cross-system working, given the impact of COVID in our workforce, in addition to the usual winter challenges. We're conscious of the constant asks on HSCP staff, including the significant challenge of delivering the flu vaccination programme. We acknowledged our appreciation of the effort, hard work and resilience of the workforce. We had an update on recovery and noted the focus was very much still on response in a dynamic situation, and that the winter planning work includes developing resilience and scenario plans with each service. We were given an overview of the current financial position and the likely challenges we could face in the coming year, including likely savings, the ongoing impact of COVID, and planning work continues in preparation for the January budget announcement. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Bamforth, for that update. Can I just accept that, because obviously we don't take questions on it. So item number 8 is Provost engagements, which is simply for noting. Not an awful lot happening, as you can see. And move on to item number 9, which is the COVID-19 recovery action update. So before we actually look at this and discuss it, can I just remind everybody that we're not just talking about figures or numbers on a sheet here. We're talking about real people, and real people in East Renfrewshire who have lost their lives, and relatives who are grieving for people who have died as a result of COVID. And I think it's important when we have this discussion that we never actually lose sight of the impact on individual human beings. So before I open this paper up for discussion, can I pass over to Mr. Cahill to give an update, to provide an update in relation to the COVID-19 Local Authority Discretionary Fund, and then I'll open it up to questions and comments from councillors. Mr. Cahill.
Thanks very much, Provost. There's been a lot changing really quickly on the whole scene about business grants, and they're all in the system at the current time. And one in particular is that they've made a local authority discretionary fund for business support available. However, given the timescales involved, I didn't want to wait until next February, and I wanted to, for the next meeting of the council meeting, and I wanted to ask for delegated powers to me in consultation with the leader, who's got responsibility as convener for economic development, to put in place local arrangements and a scheme with broad guidelines to disperse payments from the COVID-19 Local Authority Discretionary Grant Fund. I think the reason I'm asking to do this is because I think the council will want to act quickly to help support businesses as soon as possible. Some of them, as you'll all be well aware to some extent, they're absolutely on their knees, particularly those that haven't been able to get assistance from the previous schemes, and this one includes a discretionary element. So basically I'm asking for those delegated powers to press on and get the scheme in place so that we can act quickly and help businesses off the floor, so to speak.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Andy. Can I maybe bring in the leader of the council just to speak to the paper itself then?
Yeah, thanks, Provost, and happy to echo the comments that you made at the start of this. We are more than aware that the COVID has taken its toll on many individuals across the authority, and our condolences certainly go to the families who have suffered most during the past few months. In relation to the delegated powers for Mr. Caffrey, the Director of Environment, this is money that's become available. There are some high level at the moment views on how the money should be disseminated to the respective businesses, but we certainly don't want to waste any time. We've been very successful with the funding that we've already had and getting it disseminated to the many businesses that we have supported in recent months, and hopefully this can continue to support the, again, additional businesses, some that maybe haven't been supported previously because of the discretionary nature of the fund, but we will certainly work with many colleagues and with neighbouring authorities to ensure that we can get that funding out to individuals as quickly as we possibly can. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on our health, our economy and society, and with a damaging impact on our way of life. And this paper goes some way of revealing the amount of work that has gone on in recent months to try and alleviate as many of those circumstances as possible. And so I'd like to thank the hard work and the efforts of our communities, our businesses, and of course our staff and the public sector for the way in which we have dealt with the pandemic. We have seen innovation, we have seen caring and kindness in no small measure to help mitigate its impact as much as possible. I'd also like to express my thanks to our TU side, who, without whose support, it would have been significantly more difficult. They have been extremely supportive and helpful throughout this phase in ensuring that as an authority we have been able to deliver as much as we possibly could for our many residents. But at the same time, I'm happy to note that for it to be noted that at COSLA leaders meeting last week was more than happy to support the statement, indeed the paper, that was going to Scottish Government to call on the Scottish Government to ensure that it recognises the efforts across our one workforce in local government for the work that has been done over the last few months. And in recognition of that, to ensure that Scottish Government equally recognise the work that Scottish local government has put in over the last few months, particularly since March, since lockdown, in ensuring that we have tried to mitigate the effects of the pandemic as much as we possibly could, and will continue to do so in the very near future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Buchanan. Could I call in Councillor Miller?
Thank you very much, Provost. In relation to this update, can I, as a newly independent councillor, but one who served in the Emergencies Committee for the first 3 months of the COVID pandemic until the end of June, congratulate and thank all the council and trust staff who have worked and volunteered throughout the past 9 months, some at great personal cost, as has been mentioned earlier on. As Tony, Paul and Paul can confirm, it was not uncommon to get emails from some people at 11 PM or on a couple of occasions 1 AM to keep us up to date in events as they happened. Can I thank the Chief Executive and every member of the CMT, heads of service and everyone within this service for the sterling work they have done to keep the council services running at as good a level as possible. I know there has been some complaints along the way, notably likes of the couch and things like that. And as an opposition councillor, perhaps I should have been critical. But I knew that the hours that some of these people were working, and it would have been churlish to criticise folk that are working 10, 12 and sometimes more hours a day. So perhaps someone can pass on my thanks to all of those who have worked so hard to keep things going, including the humanitarian hubs, folk phoning the residents who are shielding, and all other wee things that are residents thoroughly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments, Councillor Miller. I call in Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I don't think any more needs to be said and has been said already, other than to say that I think we can all recognise, and I sincerely hope that Scottish Government recognise the value of local authorities. This is where local authorities come into their own, the local knowledge, knowing exactly where funds and help and assistance has to be directed. And as I say, I do hope that Scottish Government do not have a short memory when, if and when, and let's hope it's sooner rather than later, we can all move on from where we are. This, as I say, is where we really excel. I say we, I don't mean we in the sense that the CMT, the team at council, the people who are actually doing the jobs and the work have done an exceptional job, and I think we all recognise that. I do hope that Scottish Government do so when the grant allocation comes in February. Thank you.
Okay, we note that. Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Aiken.
Hiya. Yeah, it's just have we been asked for delegated powers to Councillor Buchanan and Andy Cahill to dish out public money to local businesses? Is that what we've been asked for tonight? If we are, if it's, I'd like to know who it is making the decision as to which businesses are to get money and what share of the money each business is to get, and on what basis. The councillors were been asked to hand over discretionary powers to Mr. Cahill and Mr. Buchanan, but we're not told on what basis, what criteria, what basis is the money being handed out. You know, it seems to me that it'd be good if we had some indication of how discretion is to be applied. Like I say, what share of the money to which businesses? Because it seems to be very, very general.
Okay, well, I will call Mr. Cahill in at the end if he can give any more information. But I mean, to be clear, we're asking you to note the paper, but also to approve discretionary powers to Mr. Cahill to make those decisions in consultation with the leader. So yes is the answer to that. I mean, discretionary powers does mean that to make payments as and when necessary. Can I call in then Councillor O'Kane, who's been waiting?
Thank you, Provost. I really just want to associate myself with the comments of colleagues about, I suppose, as we come to the end of the calendar year and the last full council of 2020. I mean, in my 8 years in the council, this has been a year like no other, and I'm sure colleagues who've been in the council longer than I would agree that it's probably been the most unusual year they've ever experienced. COVID, you're absolutely right, Provost, when you opened this item. There is a human cost, and we're all seeing that, I think, in our communities and our families. People have died, people continue to die and become unwell, and we need to continue to do all we can to ensure that we progress towards the mass rollout of the vaccine and testing, and obviously we've lost people on that in the paper as well. I think I would just want to make 2 brief points. Firstly, as convener of education, to offer my thanks to our education team and staff for helping schools to continue to teach young people and support young people in a variety of ways, particularly those who have been struggling through the pandemic with mental health and kind of resilience issues. And I've spoken about that education committee on those bespoke reports as well. But certainly they will be looking forward to closing on Friday for the Christmas holidays, and we wish them a restful holiday period. All of them, absolutely. I would also just like to make the more general point about council staff, that they deserve our thanks and our praise, and associate myself with the comments of the leader and Councillor Miller. There has been a huge dedication this year. I think there is relevance, and we made the political commitment across party lines to commit to whatever was needed to face the pandemic. We need to see that being repaid essentially by Scottish Government and others, and certainly our trade unions have been clear on that as well, and happy to support the sentiments Councillor Buchanan makes. And indeed, I know that the unions have been campaigning on a number of key issues, not least recognising local government workers in the same way that we're recognising health workers, consolidating the living wage, for example, and indeed calling for a fair funding settlement. So happy to support all of that, which no Unison have been calling for as well, and just to thank all of our workers as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor O'Kane. Mrs McMillan.
Thank you very much, Provost. If I can come in 2 points. The first is to thank councillors for the comments about the work of the staff. The staff have been absolutely unbelievable. There are so many staff in all parts of the council who at the moment are still putting in many, many hours to protect the most vulnerable in our society. I sometimes think this phase is actually more challenging than the first phase. In the first phase, we stopped many services. In this phase, we're trying to keep as many of our services going at the same time with many, many additional duties. So I think the staff will really appreciate all the comments made tonight, but we do have quite a number of more months after Christmas. We've talked about mass vaccinations in the paper and the support we'll need if there is mass testing. So there's a huge amount of work ahead of everyone as we move, teachers, our team in HSCP. So I don't think many people will get much of a break over Christmas, and certainly I would say for 3 to 6 months after that. And staff are tired because of the amount of work they've been doing. Lots of people haven't been able to take their holidays to the extent they normally would. So it has been, but the staff are so committed and so enthusiastic about doing the right thing. I'm very proud of everybody, every member of staff is committed to that. In response to, just for clarification, for Councillor Aitken, in terms of the powers that Mr Cahill's asked for, and I realise it's not written in the paper because it all happened recently. In terms of governance, when the government gave us business money for business grants before, they gave us quite strict guidelines about the types of business. So nothing was brought to council because there was no discretion on it, apart from information on the amount of money that was available. What the Scottish Government did in this was, in the same as that actually happened in England, there are companies and organisations who don't quite meet the rules of the other schemes. So councils were given a little bit of discretionary funding to give grants to those companies who don't meet the scheme. But just for absolute clarity, what the delegation has asked for is Mr Cahill to develop the rules of the scheme, agree those with the leader of the council who's the convener for that area. the people actually then giving out the grants will not be, for example, the leader will not be involved or have knowledge of the companies who actually get the grants. I very much doubt if Mr. Cahill will. He'll agree with his team the rules in consultation with the leader, and then the economic development team will take those rules and will allocate money according to the rules. So there'll be a separation between creating the rules for the funding and the actual dishing out of the funding. Mr. Cahill and the leader will not be involved in making individual decisions on companies. They'll just agree what types of companies. So I just thought that'd be useful for useful clarification.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Councillor Wallace. You're on mute, Councillor Wallace.
Sorry, yeah, I think it just underlines just my comments earlier on about internal audit, and I think Councillor Aitken is quite right to raise his concerns about the use of monies that are going through the council, and just, as I say, just to make sure that we are scrutinising it correctly. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buchanan, you want to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Provost. It was just to highlight some of the issues there. When we say discretionary, the money is still all accounted for, as Councillor Wallace has alluded to. What we will create is the ability for us as a council to support those businesses which maybe missed out in the first tranche because they fell through the net in terms of they maybe didn't have premises, so didn't have a rateable value. Perhaps they couldn't get a business bank account because the bank wouldn't entertain them on that basis. That doesn't mean that they're not a business and they're not a recognised business. What we will do is work with our own business development team, our business gateway, and indeed the local Chamber of Commerce to get all of those individuals who may be missing, who may be missed out in the first round, who may be missing out again because of, for example, closure of hospitality, etc., and because of additional lockdown phases. So we will work with those organisations. We will set the parameters, and ultimately it will come back. We will not be doing anything that's not happening, if you like, in neighbouring authorities. But it's to try and help and support those who fell through the net the first time because of the restrictions that were placed on it. But we know where people are genuine businesses, and we're looking to try and support them as much as possible. And I believe that that's the right thing to do. It's how the money should be spent. It's what the money is designed for. And we will ensure that they can try and do that to the best of our ability and ensure that we support the businesses in our local area.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buchanan. Councillor O'Kane.
No, I think it might just be worth, Provost, at this point as well, putting on record thanks to the economic development team for the work already done in terms of the huge amount of work done to issue grants to businesses who have really struggled. Certainly in my own ward, I know how valued hospitality businesses have felt the support from economic development, Michael McKernan and his team, and indeed other officers in the council, like the Licence and Standards Officer, Dominic Mann, giving advice and support, particularly when there are when the tiers come in and different regulations were being navigated. So really just for Mr. Cahill to take that back to the team who I think work exceptionally hard to deliver.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, we've had a good discussion in that report, which is for noting, of course, in terms of the COVID, but I'm also looking for approval for the delegated powers to Mr. Cahill and Councillor Buchanan. So are we all comfortable with that?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we now move on?
Maybe Mr. Cahill was wanting to come in there just for a second, I think.
Sorry, Mr. Cahill.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do in a verbal update. As I said, all this stuff's happening really, really quickly, and the team are up to their eyes. If I could just set a little bit of background just before we leave it. I'm not particularly happy with the idea of a discretionary scheme that has got very little guidance. It puts my staff in a very difficult position. We're waiting for guidance to come out, and it's been painfully slow. And we have to administer these things quite soon. What I want to ensure is we've got some consistency with other councils, particularly neighbouring councils. It's going to look ridiculous if, for example, we decide that we don't give grants to taxi drivers and we don't give grants to window cleaners that Renfrewshire and Glasgow do. That's going to put us in a really difficult position. The other option is that wait and I'll report to the February Council. It's the end of February, and ask for delegation through that. I think the horse is bolted to a huge extent by that point in time. And the one thing that I was thinking is that perhaps once I've agreed the draft guidelines of what would be included in the scheme and who would be eligible, when I've agreed that with the leader, then perhaps it might be possible that we just circulate that details of that scheme to members so that they can at least see it. I'm just looking for options that doesn't involve us having to wait until the end of February. That was all. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Aiken, get your hand up. Want to speak?
Yeah, so it makes me more confused because the Chief Executive, Lorraine McMillan, said that there's very definite guidance in the Scottish Government as to how this money is to be dispersed, and that was exactly what Mr. Cahill was mentioning. You know, should a taxi company get it, or a shop company, or whatever? So the Chief Executive is telling us that there's very firm guidance, excellent guidance in the Scottish Government, and Mr. Cahill tells us the guidance is actually very lax and very general, and there's not really definite guidance at all. So which one do you believe? Who's right? Is it Mr. Cahill or is it Lorraine McMillan? Because they both can't be right.
Can I come in?
Yep.
Provost?
Mrs. McMillan.
Yeah. Just for clarity, Councillor Aiken, what I said was that there are many business schemes. The government have given us many business grants, and all the other schemes have very definite grant criteria around them about the type of business. This is a different type of grant that they've given us to catch the businesses who might fall down between the rules of the other schemes. And they've actually called it a discretionary scheme where local authorities can use that money to best meet the needs of their local economy in their local area. So all the other schemes have definite rules. This one doesn't. There's just some very broad guidance that has been given out, and each council has to develop their own rules based on what is best for their local area. So it's quite small. I can't remember the amount of money. It's relatively small compared to the other business grants, because we've given out many, many billions of business grants, but very much based on a very strict set of rules. This one doesn't have it. So this, just to be absolutely clear, this is discretionary. That's the name of the fund. So it's at the discretion of local authorities to agree the rules. And I've talked to colleagues around the west of Scotland. Because the scheme came out at relatively short notice, everybody's in the same position. Some understanding is all my colleagues are going to their councils or have already got their directors have got the delegated authority, because the priority is to get the money out to businesses as quickly as possible. These businesses are really struggling. So that's the aim, is to get the money out properly with a set of rules as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. McMillan. Again, we've had a good discussion. Can we note the paper and approve the delegation? Anybody otherwise minded? Okay.
Agreed. Yes.
Agreed for that. Thank you. And moving on to item number 10, which is Eastwood Leisure Centre and Eastwood Park Master Plan. So the report in front of us this evening is seeking approval to prioritise the leisure centre and theatre in the short to medium term, as opposed to the wider master planning issues, which we do need to look at, and asking the council to note the other associated matters surrounding this. So I'm very happy to open it for any debate and discussion that people may have on the paper.
Provost, if I could just make a couple of comments.
Yes, please.
The first comment I'd like to make is to thank the consultant, Ian Harper, for giving me a set of drawings, because after the initial meeting that we had with the plans and the drawings, it's very difficult to actually see what it was we were looking at. And when I phoned and asked him, he was quite happy to deliver me a full set of drawings, which makes a big difference when you're trying to look at something and understand what's going on. You've actually got a proper set of plans that you can really have a good look at. And the other point I would like to emphasize that in the papers on page 78 at the top, under item D, again, it highlights the fact that Shawwood and Broomburn Park are no longer to be considered anything but open green space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Anybody else? Councillor Wallace. Councillor Wallace, you're on mute.
I'll get this right yet. I know there's been a huge amount of debate that went into actually finding that this will end up at Eastwood Park, and I think the majority of people are delighted that it has done so. I think now that there's maybe a concern over timing, etc. Given what we've all gone through in the past year, it's just coming down to, I think, affordability. Given the challenges we are going to be having over, and it's not just going to be the next couple of years, it's going to be decades before we recover from where we are. So, as I just say, just to kind of put this into the frame, that this wonderful new building, and I don't underestimate the value it will have to us as a community, but just in terms of affordability, what's going to be 30, 40 million pounds at a time in which we have got literally billions to pay back. It's just to, I don't wish to put a dampener on it, but just to put a marker there that we look at this very closely about how we're going to move forward with the Eastwood Centre. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Anybody else? Councillor O'Kane.
I think just to welcome the paper and this stage on the journey. I think it's been a long journey. We've had detailed debate on sites and on plans and on proposals. I think tonight we see the beginning of a kind of concrete proposal that we can move forward in Eastwood Park. Obviously, this comes at a challenging time, and we've spoken tonight as well about how COVID has caught us. You know, no one could have anticipated a year ago where we would be with this, but you know, there is something for me in absolutely being really clear on how we build this and how we deliver it. But I think there is something important about building our way out of COVID and using capital investment to improve our local economy and to support businesses and that sort of thing as well. So I'm not saying that we don't have to be very careful and very considered. I think there is absolutely a key to using capital investment to drive things forward. And obviously we've seen flexibilities around things like loan charges given to us by government. So we just need to utilise those where we can as well.
Thank you. Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I think Councillor Kane just makes the points I was going to make there. The information that we're getting in order to build the economy back, and in order to create things in the future, we are going to have to make big decisions. This is an opportunity for us moving forward. I think it delivers an excellent leisure centre for the Eastwood area, and we all know, I've had the discussions, that that's very much required and needed. And if we're going to support our local economy, if we're going to support the construction industry, then now is the time that we should be looking at that and taking that forward and building for the future of East Renfrewshire. So I think that goes without saying. I think it's also worth, without going into too much more of the detail just now, to bring in Mr. Cahill and Mr. Harper, who I believe has some of the slides that he can show to members about, although there's some attached to the paper, but I think there's some slides available that we can have a look at what is some of the early proposals in moving this project forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Buchanan. Okay, I'm happy to do that now and look at the slides before I'm conscious some councillors wanting to speak still, but I will bring you in later. Mr. Cahill.
Just very briefly, Provost, I just wanted to make it clear that this paper relates only to the Eastwood Leisure Centre and Theatre element, but there are other master plan proposals that the Member Officer Working Group have seen and also have been touched on in some previous reports to the Council. There's a bigger, wider vision about the whole of Eastwood Park, about traffic management, cycle paths, walking, outdoor spaces. The proposals in that respect are actually quite well developed, and maybe Ian Harper can mention them very quickly in his couple of slides. I'm not looking for any big decisions tonight, just other than the principle. We proceed with Eastwood Park. I'm confident we can do it now, and I think there's sufficient financial provision within the existing capital programme for next year, but I'll come back in February with updated costs, at least for the leisure centre and the other element. So maybe Ian might want to just comment a few bits about some of the wider stuff about public event spaces and events, lawn and forest breakouts and some things like that. So that's all I wanted to say, Provost. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cahill. Can I call in the consultant, if you're online at the moment, able to speak?
Yep. Hi, thanks everyone. I'll just quickly show the slides. We just selected a couple of the images from the information that's been developed to give a flavour of what's proposed. I'll just screen share just now. Hopefully you can all see that. So I think the important thing is how do we sort of reinvigorate the park and really take advantage of the stunning setting and its location. Obviously central is Eastwood House, and we will be very respectful of that and have carefully considered its proportions and how it sits within the park. There are a number of aspects that we've been through this year. We've been discussing proposals working group, but also with technical teams, including the Leisure Trust, who run the existing leisure centre, and we've made a lot of good progress. I think the key thing is that we are suggesting a building which is strongly informed in its design by the park itself. So the idea is a building which reflects the woodland setting. We've tried to design a roof which is almost like canopy trees, and the architecture that also seeks to pick up on the trees, with plenty of glazing, inviting you into the building and also giving views back out and reflecting the surroundings. And I think importantly, as Andy has mentioned, Mr. Cahill, the landscape also needs to be generous, and we'll design paths and lighting and all of these other features around the building to make sure that we make most of the areas. Importantly, I think it's a great opportunity in the building to continue that park feel right through. In a similar way to buildings like Kelvin Grove in Glasgow, where you can actually wander through the building to go from one part of the park to another. So this image is of potential arrival space, and it just gives a sense of being accessible to everybody, and making it a really bright and airy space where you've got views out into the surrounding landscape. And the materials of the surroundings being extended into the building, so timber be used in the structure. I think importantly, Andy mentioned that the focus at the moment is the leisure centre and theatre, but we very carefully assessed the positioning of the building so that it maximises the opportunity for all of the areas within the park. So I think really the existing leisure centre is right in the middle of the park, and at the moment it really feels quite congested when you arrive into the park. So the idea is to build the new leisure centre further into the park, which opens up this central space as a nice attractive park space. And importantly, what it's trying to do is create a backdrop for Eastwood House and define essentially a walled garden for the setting of Eastwood House and the woodlands beyond. And within all of that, we've carefully considered that there are a number of routes into the park. At the moment, there are five routes in. And the building seeks to address all of these and allow for enhancement to those in the future, as well as making the spaces around the building very usable. So whether that's for outdoor theatre or for running or walking or external education opportunities, it seeks to address all of these issues. I think importantly, we're trying to create something which is really unique and responding to its settings. So I think we want bright and airy spaces. We want pool facilities, attract new members in the longer term, and a very sustainable building. So ultimately reducing energy over a long period of time. And all of this is supplemented with a document which has access to, and we're happy to answer any questions if you have it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Harper, for that background information. So Colin, Councillor Merrick first has been waiting to speak, and then, as I say, anybody wants to speak, put their hand up.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Harper, for the presentation. I've seen this a couple of times now, and it never fails to excite me, if you know what I mean. This is let's go back with some of the comments that Councillor Buchanan and Councillor O'Keefe in particular made earlier, and yeah, also for Councillor Wallace, it was pointed out we are in a hostile environment. We didn't realise we were going to be in this hostile environment, but the reaction to that is not. I don't think the best reaction is to lie down and forget about the future and give up on hope. And this is a hopeful sign that we're doing here. We're trying to build a way out of it, and this is East Renfrewshire's contribution. We're building for jobs in this centre. We're building for jobs in building it and jobs for the future. We've heard about sustainable building, and we're finally getting to make the best use of Eastwood Park with the master plan. This is the end of the beginning of that almost. So I think it's a really positive thing in some of the darkest times, and some more that we still have to face well into next year, we think, at this point. That was all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Merrick. Could I call in Councillor MacDonald?
Yeah, I just echo that sentiment by Councillor Merrick. I mean, this is a renaissance of sorts that we will be experiencing, hopefully once the cloud of COVID leaves us. We need to have something within the area that is of benefit for our physical and mental well-being. And what better than a world-class facility like this that will last for a significant period of time. Obviously, I do have concerns about the overall costs of it in terms of being able to bridge the inevitable financial hiccups that may present themselves from time to time. And I just hope that we don't have a knee-jerk response to suddenly raise people's council tax bills by a larger than normal council tax increase, rather than employing really ambitious revenue generation, such as, and I'll say it, I'm one of the few councillors that will stand up and say it. I do think that we have to have better programmes with regards to things like parking and advertising to generate revenue for the local authority. And I think that is something that we need to focus on, rather than constantly going back to our council taxpayers year on year and looking for sizable increases on their council tax to fund ambitious projects. So yes, this is a great thing. I'm very supportive of it. The drawings look fantastic, and I think going forward, I think it's something that we will all benefit from.
Okay, thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Can I call in Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Provost. Once again, going back to several months, perhaps years ago, we've had the fights about where we should have locate this world-class, or hopefully world-class building. We've all agreed to have it at Eastwood. We've heard our Chief Financial Officer tonight telling us that the interest rates is as low at the moment as they could ever be. So let's just shut up and get on with it.
Okay. That sounds like a metaphor for the council business tonight. Councillor Wallace. Yeah, on mute again, Councillor Wallace.
Sorry, just to say that Councillor Miller clearly won't be around to tell us or thank his great-great-great-great-grandchildren for having contributed towards this new leisure centre. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Note the position in the paper, approve it and move on. And can I thank Mr. Harper for waiting patiently through the council meeting to contribute this evening. So I hope it wasn't too painful for you, Mr. Harper. Can I move on then to item number 11, which is the Neilston Learning and Leisure Campus, and again the wider regeneration update for Neilston. The report is seeking approval to prioritise phase 1 of the project to provide the new learning campus at Neilson and St Thomas Primary Schools and the Madras Family Centre and the local library. We really need to progress this to allow the project as set out to go forward, and the council tonight is just simply asked to note the associated matters around this and effectively to allow this to go forward. So I'm happy to open it for any comments or questions that people have. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Provost. I won't go into the detail. If I could draw your attention to page 141, the conclusions, which I thought was interesting. The developments proposed at Neilson are a once-in-a-generation opportunity to improve learning, etc., etc. Could someone please tell me how long is a generation? That would be helpful. I've looked it up in my dictionary, but I'd be interested to know what does the report actually mean? Once in a generation, how long actually is that?
Okay, we'll see if we can quantify that. Councillor O'Kane.
Thank you, Provost. And far be it for me to define a generation. And you may get different answers from different people, Councillor Grant, when it comes to that particular phrase. But I think it is. There's a generational opportunity in this for Neilson, and I think there's a good symmetry tonight that we have a paper, the previous paper dealing with investment and renewal in Eastwood, and this paper which deals with renewal investment in the Leven Valley over the next period of time. I think that this is a really important development for the community in Neilson, but also we've committed to this new shared campus being delivered now for many years. We've had money allocated in the capital plan, and we have also had commitment from the Scottish Government via the Scottish Futures Trust to have the contribution from their building schools programme as well. So perhaps to borrow from Councillor Miller, it's time to get on with it, because the community are expecting this certainly the new school part of it to come quickly. COVID will obviously have an impact in terms of delivery of timescales, but I know that the community continues to be very enthused and excited about the delivery, certainly of the education element first of all, and then looking at the next phase to deliver leisure and other facilities, and to regenerate and renew the community there. Obviously a growing community and a community that's changing as well. But really I think we need to get on with delivering the school so that we can meet the criteria for Scottish Government funding, and we can deliver a new facility in that community, which again will be, I think, our first shared campus between a Catholic school and a non-denominational school with a nursery provision as well. So obviously, again, seeking to find the efficiencies that we can whilst respecting in both schools.
Excuse me, Provost, can I just come back on this generation, once in a generation? I looked up my dictionary and it says usually considered to be about 30 years. So that's why I asked the question, because the SNP seem to think that 6 years is a generation. That's why I asked, what is this report here telling us? What is a generation? The SNP seem to have a different view of a generation to the rest of the world. Thank you.
I feel like we're going down that road, Councillor Grant. I think I'll avoid the constitutional debate this evening and stick to the Neilson Leisure Centre, the Neilson campus, if we may. Councillor MacDonald.
Councillor Grant, according to Wikipedia, it does say 30 years, and it does say at the bottom, unless one lives in Scotland where people are missold a product, therefore it's 6 years.
Okay, right, we'll pass that as well, I think. Councillor
Buchanan.
Not very independent, but I couldn't help myself there.
No. Councillor Buchanan.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I'll tackle first of all the paper. Delighted to see this paper here. I think it's been a long time coming, so it really is the proposals for the leisure and learning campus, particularly the learning campus, looking at and bringing the nursery and the two schools together are fantastic. And it's been a long time coming, so it'll be a fantastic opportunity for the village, and we'll do a huge amount of good work in terms of delivering regeneration for the village and support it long into the future. In terms of what's a generation, I think the difficulty we face is that for every year we have a Tory government, it puts 10 years on you here in Scotland, and that's a significant amount of time.
Oh dear, dear, dear. Oh dear, dear.
Councillor Miller, to speak to the paper.
Thank you very much. As Councillor McCann said, 10 years on you obviously does a lot for his hairline. However, to go back to the paper, I'm delighted to see this, as my mother was born and brought up in Neilson, therefore I've family relationships in Neilson. So hopefully my great-great-grandchildren will benefit from it as well.
Yeah, sure they will. Councillor O'Kane.
Just to say, Provost, I never knew that about Councillor Miller, so it endears him to me even more.
There's a lot you probably don't know about me, Councillor O'Kane. Some you wouldn't want to know.
I think we'll leave that there. Yeah, the love affair developing in the council, cross-party. Right, okay, can we approve the paper? I mean, I think it is a very positive paper and something that we all should be delighted about. Can we move on then to item number 12, which is the ethical standards in public life. The council has a statutory responsibility to bring such reports to the full council if there's anything that affects one of our councillors, and there is a report here this evening. It's simply for noting unless anybody wishes to say anything. I'll just note it and pass on, I think, yeah. Can we move on then to item number 13, which is the additional land acquisition at Ord Road, Newton Mearns, Barrhead. Now this report is an exempt item, so I do need your authority to exclude the press and public. So firstly, can I have your authority to do that? Is anybody any otherwise minded?
No.
Okay, that's duly agreed then. Exclude the press and public. Could I ask you?
Chair, sorry to interrupt the Mr. Harter could maybe leave as well now, please.
Okay.
That's him gone.
Right, is everybody out that should be out? Yeah.
No,
I think Councillors Miller and McLean are going to leave the meeting as well, Provost.
Right,
yes. Can I speak, Councillor? Can I speak, Provost? It's
yes.
Just obviously because this is the last item. I'm not going to be sending any Christmas cards to councillors, but I will donate to my usual charity of Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice in lieu of Christmas cards. So can I wish you all a very Merry Christmas? And
thank you.
Thank you. Next year. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, and we'll probably many of us doing the same thing. So again, can I just wish you again, Councillor Miller, all the best for the next year and a happy and Christmas and Merry New Year's.
Me too. Happy New Year. Happy Christmas, everyone. A good New Year to you.
Similar to you, Councillor McLean. All the best.
Have a
nice time over the festive season. Thank you.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. So given the two councillors down, can we move on to the actual business of the paper itself then?